welcome again to the summit. Glad that you're here to join us today. Again, a big shout out to Brandon Stiller and One Media for helping us bring you this summit, for helping troubleshoot some of the technical difficulties, and the Butterfly Pavilion for hosting us. So let's see, where did I leave off? Hopefully all of the collaboration that we're doing will help bring a really meaningful, informative, and engaging summit. If at any time you have questions, like we just had questions, feel free and drop them in the chat. So there's a question and answer that we'll use during the sessions, but the chat window is a great way to get feedback to me or other people if something does go wrong. Given those technical difficulties, this is probably an apropos time for me to go through a quick little introduction to how Feed Loop works. And so I'm going to play a little video now from Darren Davidson, who is our resident Feed Loop expert, and is also our resident Boulder County horticultural agent with the Colorado State University Extension Service. And so I'm going to now share my screen. Make sure I can do this. And I am going to unmute my camera so that okay, unmute my own computer so that hopefully y'all can hear this nice video. No? Feedback. Let's try it now. Can you hear me now? Okay, I think we're good. So hopefully y'all will be able to hear this video now when I play it. Can you see, Darren?
Hi, and welcome to the Colorado Pollinator Network Pollinator Summit. We're glad you're here. My name is Darren Davidson, and I'm on the planning committee for the summit. And I'm going to take just a few minutes to orient you to the Feed Loop site to make sure you get the most out of your experience. The first area I want to draw your attention to is this left-hand side menu bar. So you see highlighted is the lobby. Right now we're in the lobby. We have our thank you sponsor banner here. There is a looped lobby video that you'll see that will be running throughout the day. And if you continue to scroll down, you'll see announcements. New announcements will be popping up here throughout the day also, highlighting when different sessions are starting and different activities you can take advantage of. If we move up here, you'll see a rotating bar of logos. These are also our sponsors. If you click on a logo, it will take you to that sponsor's website and you can check them out more. If we go back to the menu bar, you'll see sessions. That's how you're going to enter the different sessions throughout the day. So we have on-demand videos that can be watched at any time. You can feel free to come back and watch these after the session as well, or after the summit, but you can also watch them during the various breaks throughout the day. And then if you click down here or scroll down here, you'll see that we have live sessions. And this is where all of the live sessions will be for the remainder of the day. So for example, opening session, you had to click here to get in. And you'll see now that the session is rolling right there in the middle. If you're interested in making the screen larger so you can see the slides better, you can click hide all. You can scroll down, get it centered, make sure it works for you. Then if you want that back, you can click show all. So once the opening session is over, we'll have a break. You can go and visit exhibitors, but then you'll need to come back to this sessions menu. And you'll click on keynote session, and that will take you to the next session. Again, that live stream will begin automatically. So I mentioned exhibitors, visiting those folks at the break. You will find them in the exhibit hall. Click there. You'll see that they are listed alphabetically. They all have a bit of a different look, but you should be able to see information about the exhibitors, perhaps some photos or some videos, different ways to get in touch with them. Some of our exhibitors are actually participating in the summit and are in attendance. If that's the case, you'll see these bars here and you'll be able to chat directly with those exhibitors. So you simply click Start Chat. You can start that. You can also, there's this chat bar here on the left, and you can start up sort of a general thread there that everyone can see. But if you want to have a private chat, that's you can do that here. Then if we move down to the next tab, it's networking. This is where you can see who is in attendance at the summit. It lists all of the speakers, anyone who is registered, so you can just scroll through that. If you find someone that you'd like to chat with, click on their name, click on Start Chat there. Once you begin chatting with different people, you can click down here in private chats, and this bar will show who you've started chats with so that you can jump back into those threads. To collapse this, you simply click on private chats again. Now at the end of the summit, we're going to have a virtual happy hour where we hope you will join us in these groups that we've created with different topic areas. If you see one that's of interest to you, say habitat gardening, you can click on that. You'll click Join Meeting and close this. You can turn on your camera and you'll pop up. You can see me there. When other people join the conversation, their videos will show up too, and there can be as many as 25 people in a given room. Feel free to come in and out of these rooms, chat with people, talk about the summit. There might be speakers in some of the rooms, so you can ask more questions. It'll just be a nice sort of informal way to wrap up the day. Now, if I go back to the lobby, yes, I do want to leave. You'll see that there's another chat here, and I can enter it like that. When I'm in a session, if I go back to sessions and I scroll down, I'm going to go to opening session. There's a chat here. If I put a message in, this is a great place to just make general comments, maybe say where you're watching from, what your general interests are. We also have a Q&A tab. The Q&A is what we'd really like folks to use for specific questions for the panelists. So every session is going to have some presentation and then a panel discussion. Our moderators are going to be watching the Q&A section and be answering those via typing, but also throwing those questions to the panelists. So be sure to use the Q&A there. If you're having any issues with FeedLoop and something isn't working, we do have this help and tech support feature there. There won't be someone there all day, but there will be someone there in the beginning and at critical periods. So feel free to type in any questions that you might have there, and hopefully you can get some extra help. So we hope you have a great time today. We're excited that you're here, and we thank you very much.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. Hopefully that got it now. Sorry about that feedback, folks. Hopefully the sounds okay now. So thanks for that great introduction, Darren, to how to run through the platform. If you've got any questions, please drop them in that chat window. Check out the help video if you need. Again, we just wanted to put that in there so that everybody could see right off the bat how to use the platform. And to all of our attendees, while I hope that you enjoy all of our live sessions today, I really hope that you take the time to check out our on-demand videos of ongoing Colorado pollinator research, to join in with discussions through the chat and the online Q&A, and with our attendees through FeedLoop's messaging and chat services. And you may see a remote presenter online here. So if you have a burning question for them, chat them and let them know. Or just let them know that you enjoyed their talk. It's always great to hear positive feedback, and it feels good to give it as well. And so with that being said, we'd like to take just a few moments to highlight some of the successes from the network over the past year and congratulate those involved for all of their hard work and dedication to pollinator conservation. And to do so, I'm going to hand it over to Amy Yarger from the Butterfly Pavilion to tell you about some of those successes. And so let me hand it over to you, and I'm going to share my screen.
Great. So what's so exciting about pollinators and pollinator conservation is just the myriad ways that people can get involved and make a difference. So I'm going to highlight some of the things that our Colorado Pollinator Network shared with us over this last year about things that they have accomplished, even in these really tough times. So one example is the Front Range Birding Company, who noticed that native plants weren't really available. And so they started working with a local wholesaler to make plants available through their shop, as well as create displays that would entice customers to purchase native plants for pollinators. They also do a lot of great work in terms of bee houses and just educating their customers. The next example is native plants and seed swaps. And there's, native plants are one of the limiting factors when it comes to having pollinator habitat. And so many people have started to organize native plant and seed swaps. And there was one recently in the Colorado Springs area that drew dozens of participating organizations. And the thing about these events is that they're free to participate in, and you don't necessarily have to have anything to swap, but you can participate and then maybe bring seeds the following year, really cultivating those relationships and cultivating that interest in native plants and growing habitat for pollinators. Oh, whoops. Our next example is really inspirational. A young person named Charlotte Becker, 9 years old, was learning at her school about pollinators and how they need our help. And she decided that she wanted to help them in her own way. And so she organized a lemonade stand. And in an hour, she raised over $150 in just an hour. And her lemonade stand drew a lot of great attention. And that she actually donated to the Colorado Pollinator Network for this summit so that we could all kind of collaborate together and reach out together. So that was incredibly inspirational. Our next example is a local company called Earth Love Gardens, transformed an old Japanese garden near the Boulder Library to become a Habitat Hero, Audubon Habitat Heroes landscape. And now it's open to the public. It had its big grand opening in September. And then our final example is one that really couldn't have come about actually without the pandemic. So Small Gardens Big Change was a partnership between CSU Extension Boulder County, Butterfly Pavilion, and the city of Boulder, in which we provided seed growing kits to seniors in Boulder to grow native plants that then could be incorporated in Boulder's pollinator corridors, which we'll be hearing a little bit more about later. And these folks took care of these seedlings for 2 months, raised them up, got them to a place. They generated over 1,000 native plants for these pollinator habitat projects in Boulder. So even being shut up in your little apartment, you can still help pollinators. So I just want to give major kudos to everybody who's had successes in this realm, and hand this back to Adrian.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amy. I'm going to keep on sharing my screen, actually. And so I'm just going to take this opportunity to reiterate to folks where the Colorado Pollinator Network came from and what our mission is. And so the Colorado Pollinator Network really came about after the very first Colorado Pollinator Summit in 2016 with a primary mission to basically work collaboratively to conserve, protect, and create pollinator habitat. And we do this primarily through sharing information about best practices for pollinator conservation and management, including providing access to resources and knowledge to help support education initiatives, conservation, restoration, and one of the things I'm going to tag on to the end, to research on pollinators within the state. And I think that really ties in well with the theme for this year's summit. If you'll notice, this isn't happenstance. Promoting pollinators through collaborative conservation came about because of feedback we received from people from last year's summit. And so while they really enjoyed hearing about all of the different conservation initiatives going on in Colorado, research efforts that were going on, what they were looking for were ways to collaborate, to give back to those conservation efforts. And so we wanted to bring you ways to collaborate in this summit. And there's lots of ways that you can collaborate as community members towards conservation action. If biodiversity loss is primarily driven by habitat loss, creating or restoring habitats is probably the best way that we have in mitigating biodiversity loss and the degradation of remaining habitat from land use change, such as agricultural intensification and urban development. And you can do this quite simply by planting habitat gardens, or also by affecting policies which change the preservation or the protection of habitats. One of the biggest impediments to our conservation status of pollinators is our knowledge about them. And so we're going to spend a lot of time this morning talking about knowledge of pollinators, their distributions, and why that's really key to understanding how much they are at risk. And then ultimately increasing awareness of pollinators through outreach and education is really important to increasing public concern about the issue. So I'm going to take just a few minutes. I know we're running a little behind schedule with our technical difficulties, but given you're going to hear some technical stuff about bees and pollinators and people who do research on them, to give you just a little bit of context about how we build knowledge about pollinators and why it's so important. And so if anybody's seen an outreach talk of mine or from other folks around the Front Range, you've probably seen this map before from Virginia Scott's paper in 2011, The Bees of Colorado. One of the most common questions I get is, how do we know if we should be worried about our bees? And we know a lot comparatively about bees within Colorado. Virginia compiled 946 species within the state. What you're looking at in this map is basically a heat map. Darker colors represent counties that have more bee diversity. So Boulder County, for instance, has 552 species there, versus Washington County, which at the time of this publication had only 5, right? And while it's important to know how diverse different counties are across Colorado, this doesn't tell you anything about how abundant any individual bee species is in any location or across the state. And to know that, we really need data on distributions of individual species. And so what exactly do I mean by a distribution? Here's Bombus occidentalis from the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. So this gray shading that you can see to over the western half of the country is where this species has been found to occur writ large. There's 2 different colors because there's 2 different subspecies. So this is a quite widely distributed bee species from Alaska all the way to Mexico, basically. We have a similar stylized map for Colorado from Wright et al., the bumblebees of Colorado. Here you can see these purple colors just correspond to county occurrences in Colorado. So any county where this bee has been found to occur. But this again doesn't tell you anything about how abundant they were. Those county occurrences are based on individual specimen records. There's 2,600 that I could find records for Bombus occidentalis in Colorado, and you can see that they're quite spaced out all over those counties, and they're not very dense in all places. And so this data is really hard to come by, and yet we have a good amount of it. The reality is the vast majority of all this distributional data comes from what I'm going to call biological collections. These are inventories. So think of national parks that go out and inventory all of the insects within them. There are bees within it that they collect and add to inventories and then output that data to someplace like the Global Biodiversity Inventorying Facility up here in the upper right, GBIF. Or surveys of places that are doing work on pollinators. And then, of course, a lot of data comes from researchers themselves who are studying ecological or evolutionary phenomena, but collect a lot of specimens. And what I like to point out is that all of these things create preserved specimens. And we've been doing this for a long time. The oldest ones that I could find on GBIF came from the late 1800s. But what you'll notice is while we have really old records, the temporal, so the spacing of these records in time is really disparate, right? And so we know most about the distribution of Bombus occidentalis from studies in the mid-60s. And from the 80s to now, we actually have very little information. We don't know if that lack of information is due to their decline or because we haven't collected data on it. What we do know is that 98% of all of the knowledge that we know on the distribution of Bombus occidentalis in the state comes from those preserved specimens, which are housed in museums and research centers. You can see here that UCMC entomology, that's the University of Colorado Museum of Natural History's collections that house Bombus occidentalis. Others housed around the country in different institutions. And while those are really valuable, we're also looking for ways to improve and engage the public in collecting this kind of distributional knowledge. So most people are probably familiar with iNaturalist now. Of interest for this bee species, Bombus occidentalis, iNaturalist observations make up just 1.5% of all Colorado records for this bee. That's not very much. And there's a lot of reasons why that could be the case. Bombus occidentalis is locally very rare. It's not as abundant as other bumblebee species like Hunt's bumblebee, which you may know. It can also be hard to identify relative to those more common bee species. And when you look at this map from iNaturalist, there's lots of places where people probably simply haven't looked for it. Most of the records for Bombus occidentalis come from along the Front Range, like Denver or Boulder, or in areas where people are often frequenting for outdoor adventure, like Rocky Mountain National Park, right? Not very many people are looking for this bee out on the Eastern Plains or in the western half of the state. And that's for a comparably wide-ranging species. Remember, this bumblebee occurs over most of the western half of the country. There are a lot of bees which are much more regionally restricted, like this gal, Macroterra opuntiae. You may guess from the specific epithet, this bee feeds on nothing but opuntia, or prickly pear pollen, and we know relatively nothing about this bee. 52 occurrences that I could find online for this bee that are housed in natural history collections. There are none on iNaturalist, and those records come from only a handful of populations, 5 across Colorado. This thing is extremely narrowly geographically limited. And it's done so because of where it nests primarily. It's called the sandstone mining bee because it literally excavates its nests in sandstone, and it's limited by finding rocks that are soft enough that it can burrow into. And so we know very little about the distributional occurrences of that bee. And just to put this into some context for a lot of people, conservation has been done really well for a lot of other groups. And so when you look at all of the occurrence records across Colorado, there are 15.8 million records on GBIF for all species within Colorado. But if you know anything about taxonomy, you can probably guess that passerine or aves, all of the green in this pie chart are birds. Birds make up the vast majority of the data that we have available to make conservation decisions. That's why we have so many conservation statuses for birds. Insects are much more depauperate, 500,000 published records. That's probably an underestimate because there are so many natural history collections which have distributional data. We just haven't yet got them published. We're working on it. When you look at bees, there's about 70,000 published records for Colorado. And while that may seem like a lot, to put it in context, that means that bees make up less than half of 1% of all distributional occurrence records that we have to assign conservation status. What that tells me is that we need lots more data, and we need you guys and other people to collaborate in helping us get that kind of distributional knowledge. And that's not even taken into account of the ecological and evolutionary mechanisms that drive diversity. All of these different types of bees are closely related and do things totally differently. And that could impact how they respond to all of the changes in land use, to pesticides, and to other ecological factors that are impacting their populations. And so things like iNaturalist are a great tool to engage the public, but it comes with limitations, right? It's a great way to get tons of occurrence records, but they're only occurrence records, and they do have their biases. People tend to take pictures of large charismatic bees, and so we see a lot of bumblebees on iNaturalist, but comparatively fewer species that are small or hard to determine what species there are. And so building new ways to engage the public and new identification tools to increase the accuracy would be really, really beneficial in improving how well we can use iNaturalist for these kinds of studies. And so my quick and dirty little guide to the summit for today, this morning, we're going to hear some pretty technical talks about distributions and bees and how we survey for them. We're going to have a keynote about how we determine what pollinators live where, how we survey them, which is no easy task. And then we'll have a session that's going to highlight examples of highly collaborative statewide inventorying and monitoring efforts for pollinators. And then this afternoon, we'll hear about collaboration at local, state, and federal levels, which is helping to drive policy changes to protect pollinators. And then examples of public-private partnerships from Colorado communities that's creating lasting pollinator habitat. So with all that said, I would highly encourage you to visit our sponsors and our booths and the breaks in between. At the end of the summit today, we're going to host a virtual happy hour. If you go to the networking tab and click on the groups, look over those groups. And during the happy hour, find one, bring something to drink, and we'll be there, right? So join a group, turn on your camera and your mic, and add to our discussions. Our hope is that through this summit, we'll build new collaborations. And even I, as a researcher, I'm hoping to do that too. So if you want to help survey for bees in Colorado, stick around during the happy hour. So a big thanks to all of our summit sponsors today. Please go check out their booths, their pages, and join the question and answers and let us know if you have any questions. So I'm going to stop sharing right now, and we're going to take a 15-minute break or a 10-minute break, and then we'll hear from our keynote speaker. So please, if you got any questions, drop them in the chat window now. Thank you.